Dear students, I'm pleased to introduce to you today a few notions on cultural studies. These notions are a continuation and a build-up on the previous notions introduced in two last episodes. We'll start with the introduction of the notion of nation. Then we move on to the concept of state. Then we will look at that overlap that is usually common between the two concepts. After that, we'll move on to two more overlapping concepts. One is the concept of race, and the second is the notion of ethnicity. In the last part of this meeting, we will look at a series of concepts that are related to culture, ethnicity, and race. Specifically, these are the concept of stereotype, the notion of racism, and the concept of prejudice. Well, let's start with the first concept today, that is nation. We'll start with two largely common definitions in the field of academy, namely in cultural studies. One is a definition introduced by Benedict Anderson, and the second one I've just summarized here is introduced by the French philosopher Renan. According to Benedict Anderson, a nation is actually just an image in the heads and imagination of a people. That is, usually people imagine that they are members of a larger community, that they have, as a community, a common history, common leaders, common culture, common symbols, etc. And in addition to this, they share one and the same territory whose borders they have, that is, as people in their minds. But according to Anderson, there is still one aspect to this image about nation. That is, while people imagine the nation, it is difficult in their everyday lives to meet all the people of this nation. And it is difficult for one member of this people to meet with or to visit every single part of the territory that he or she imagines. Then, to conclude the notion of imagined communities, Anderson focuses on the idea of sovereign communities. And we will see that this is a problem or a problematic because it defines as well a state. Well, the territory too defines, according to Anderson, a nation, but it defines as well, as we will see later, a state. Then, if we move on to Renan's definition, we can note that he puts emphasis on the notions of ancestors, common history, glories of ancestors and grandparents, etc., because according to him, it is these givens that will constitute a positive heritage of a nation and a people, and that heritage is what will contribute to the construction of the future of the nation. To put together Renan's definition and Anderson's definition, we can have as common ideas three aspects. One is a nation is a group of people who see themselves as a cohesive and coherent unit based on shared cultural or historical criteria. The second aspect that is focused on in these definitions is nations, in some ways, can be thought of as imagined communities that are bound together by notions of unity that can pivot around religion, ethnic identity, language, cultural practice, and so forth. And this is namely what Anderson highlights in his definition. The third aspect that is the focus of those definitions is the fact that the concept and practice of a nation work to establish who belongs to the nation and who does not belong to that nation. Just as, according to Anderson, the imagined territory, according to a community, involves the borders of a territory. That is, people in their imaginary can imagine what territory constitutes their own, where it finishes, and where other nations' borders start. The last common point between those definitions is that nations are socially constructed units, which means that there is actually nothing that can prove that a nation is a natural given. All nations are basically a construct of history and society. Therefore, just as societies change either through interactions with other societies or through regeneration, the coming and going of generations, it is true as well that the idea of a nation which is a cultural, a social, and historical construct changes. Therefore, there is no concept, and the concept of nation should not be understood as implying the fact that nations are static or are natural. The second concept to look at today is the concept of nation, or rather the concept of state. A state or a nation state, by the way, is a rather modern entity. That is, the notion of state we know today, or the notion of nation state, is the given of the European history. That is, towards the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century, nation states as we know them today appeared, and then they developed, and they are a given that we have now. So a state or a nation state is an independent, sovereign, and these two concepts are interesting to keep in mind. That is, the fact that nation states are independent and the fact that they are sovereign. It is these two facts that guarantee, along with the materials related, how a state dominates its borders and exercises its sovereignty over those borders. That is, the borders constituting and forming the what is called the national territory. So states are tied to a territory, that is a national territory. I just mentioned that. So sovereign or state as absolute ruler over its territory has the function of defending and controlling its territory within those borders. A state's national territory is generally recognized by other states. That is, other states recognize as well the fact that a certain state has its sovereignty over its territory. Well, this is why actually states devise passports, make treaties with other states, have diplomatic connections with other states. Of course, these material functions of the state are somehow different from the nation, which is more related to culture, more related to heritage, and more related to a people's imagined image about itself as a nation. Here we come to these important details about the state. A state monopolizes through its institutions and regulations, that is, through institutions like government, parliament, schools, etc., plus laws related and regulations related. The state, I mean, functions within its territory to guarantee the following givens. One is a state controls legitimate use of force within its territory. That is, the state is the only entity that has control and use and manipulation and legalization of armed groups and the use of arm and the use of force. Two, states usually control or are the right entities that control money at a national scale. This includes, of course, printing currency, managing and collecting taxes, etc. Three, states make rules within their territories. I've just mentioned that. That is, it is a state that defines who a citizen is, how institutions should work, how elections, for example, are to be run, what authorities should be given to who in the state, that is, to institutions and agents. Plus, a state usually controls information, that is, within its territory. One important thing to finish this definition with is that usually a state works to reproduce the idea of nation. And here again, that overlap between nation and state. Usually a state, through education, media, and other things, works to create and recreate those symbols that educate in generations of citizens that belong to a larger community that is a nation. The idea of national interest, for example, already includes the word nation here, and a state usually helps citizens' understanding of what is the national interest. Through civic educations, for example, children are introduced to different aspects of that education course that focuses on educating them on being good citizens, which implies as well being members of a nation. At this stage, we come to the following conclusions. A state, here, a state, or a nation state, or a country, has defined borders and territory over which it, that is, the state, exercises sovereignty through institutions, laws, regulations, and agents. It is additionally a country in which a nation of principally a dominant cultural group organized by cultural background. The second conclusion is the term state can be used interchangeably with country. We usually say country to mean state or state to mean country. The last point to conclude with is a nation, however, is a largely coherent and unified dominant group of people which share a common culture and a common identity. But several states include within their territory more than one dominant culture and more than just one ethnicity or one group, as we'll see in the second part of this course. At the same time, there are people with the idea of nation, of the same nation, sharing the same culture, but these people do not inhabit the same country. This is the case of most African countries or states, including populations who have or who share tribal allegiance, that is, they share the same culture, the same language, etc. But these people are dispersed between several nations. Usually a situation like this produces either racial conflicts, tribal conflicts, or even conflicts between states. Let's now move on to one more interesting concept, that is ethnicity. Ethnic group is another term often used interchangeably with culture, and at times with nation. Then this continuous overlap between these concepts. Ethnicity is actually a term that is used to refer to a wide variety of groups who might share a language, historical origins, religion, identification with a common nation state, or cultural system. Ethnic groups might share physical appearances, though that's not necessary. They may also share a memory of colonization, slavery, expatriation, as is the case with African American ethnicity, with diasporic Africans in general, diasporic Palestinians, or other ethnicities. Some examples of ethnicities are the ethnicity of Africans. Look, here we have Africans who are citizens of France. We call them Franco-Africans, African Americans in the US, and Anglo-Africans in the UK. There are as well Arab Americans in the US, Latino Americans in the US as well, etc., etc. Another keyword related to ethnicity is a subculture. This refers to a coherent, smaller collective within a larger culture. If we take the example of the US, we have one dominant culture, which is Euro-American culture. It is the main culture, but together with it and in interaction with it, there are other cultures, namely African American culture, Native Indian culture, Latino American culture, even Arabo-American culture, etc., etc. In addition, there are other forms of culture. For example, hippie culture, hip-hop culture. What's particular about subculture is that they can be oppositional sometimes, and they can propose an alternative view of culture. Let's look at two examples in this respect. The example of hip-hop or hippie culture. These are subcultures. They are related to youth, usually, and they are different in style, in dress style, in hairstyle, etc., as a way to oppose, symbolically, of course, the main culture, the dominant culture, but not to express a hierarchy of cultures the term subculture is not actually preferred today. The concept that is preferred rather is the term co-culture. Well, the advantage of co-culture as a concept is it expresses that there is no hierarchy between cultures. There is no culture that is superior, and there is no culture that is inferior either. What is there, however, is interaction between cultures and equality between cultures plus variety between cultures. So the concept co-culture highlights these givens. One, it highlights variety, that is, we can have in one state several cultures, which is positive, by the way. Cultures are different. That's one characterizing feature of cultures, of course, but it's not negative necessarily. And cultures are equal in the sense that a culture has the same function in connection to its people. That is, it serves the same purposes. It is just it is a way of life to, for example, say Euro-Americans, and the Afro-American culture expresses a way of life of this ethnicity. So these two cultures are different, but they are equal when taken into consideration their function. So to sum up, the term co-culture is an alternative to the term subculture, because while subculture may imply a hierarchy or superiority and or inferiority of a certain culture, co-culture highlights equality and variety of cultures. The next concept to look at is the concept of race. I'll be keeping this concept between inverted commas, and I will be keeping the capitalization of R, because there is much reserve amongst academicians about this word. So let's have a tentative definition, though actually whatever definition we may come up with will fail to show what race is, because actually it's difficult to say what it is, and nobody can decide over their race. So commonly, race refers to physiological or genetic similarities among people, which mark a group of people from one another. That is, here we focus on physiological, biological appearances like skin color, facial features, hair texture, skull shape, etc. Hence the categories: the German race, the yellow race, the black race. But I capitalized B here and Y there and G there to express my reserve as to the whole idea of race. Race is a historically and socially constructed category. That is, it's not a naturally given category. It is constructed during a specific history and a specific development of European society. But while designating a race through physical characteristics, as our tentative definition tried out, we get finally trapped in these two fallacies. One, some physical characteristics would demonstrate that a certain group of people has some racial superiority or supremacy, which is not the case at all. While at the same time, that implies that another group or other group have or has racial degradation, and this is not true indeed. So the problem with race is while it emerged as an idea in Europe, it was at that time mixed up with the idea of colonialism, because, for example, both Hegel and before him, Kant were speaking about racial taxonomy or racial hierarchy. That is, there is a hierarchy of races. Topping this hierarchy is the white race, or the German or Caucasian race. Then we go down until we find the black race at the lowest degree of that taxonomy. Of course, this expresses a lot of racism, as we will see later, and this is one main construct of scientific racism advanced by de Gobineau, who advances through his examination of the form of skull shape that the skull shape of the black race demonstrate the inferiority of this race and its low capacity of thinking, and etc. In general, it is this kind of thinking and highlighting of race that contributed to slavery, colonialism, racism, discrimination, and prejudice. Before we finish our discussion of the concept of race, it is important to note this. Race has currently been proven to be both socially and biologically irrelevant and insignificant. According to Gilroy, in his book Against Race 2000, one undermining of the idea of race is that throughout history, humans were mobile, and there was an interaction between populations. There is, for example, intermarriage and hybridity, both cultural hybridity, and if you might, through intermarriage, races get automatically hybrid. But Gilroy focuses on what is recently named genealogical DNA test, because these tests have demonstrated the inaccuracy of the whole idea of race. That is, a DNA, here is a definition of what the test is. A DNA-based test looks at specific locations of a person's genome in order to find or verify ancestral genealogical relationships, or, with lower reliability, to estimate the ethnic mixture of individuals. Any one of you, dear students, can check many videos about this. You might be astonished at noticing that a lot of blonde Americans who believe that their race is Caucasian and their origins are Anglo-Saxon are disappointed by describing that their origins and a large degree of their blood, this is speaking about race, is actually black. That is, they are originated in Africa. Well, that's all for this episode, in which we have covered definitions of the concept of nation, the concept of state, the concept of ethnicity, and we finished up with the concept of race. Thank you very much for your attention. With this, we come to the conclusion of this episode, and next time we'll go into explain some more keywords in the field of cultural studies. Thank you.